They said it was a death sentence. No weapons, no escort, no translator. Just a human walking into the most xenophobic empire in the galaxy, the Kalari Dominion, whose laws stated, no outsider enters and breathes again. He carried nothing, not even fear, just a bag, a step, a calm. You'll be ashes in a day, they told him. They were wrong. He walked out 7 days later. The Dominion changed forever, and the galaxy never forgot his name, even though he never gave one. They called it Kalari Space, though no star chart labeled it. It was the place maps blurred on purpose, where diplomatic ships blinked out mid-transmission, where silence wasn't just expected, it was enforced. Everyone knew the rules. No trespassing, no talking, no second chances. The Kalari were ancient, brutal, elegant in their violence. They communicated only once, centuries ago, with a message that translated loosely as, "We neither require company nor tolerate interruption." And the galaxy had obeyed, because disobedience had consequences. Entire delegations erased, ambassadors returned hollowed, translation corps overwritten with screams. So when the Terran Council declared it would send a human envoy into the Forbidden Zone, the galactic community responded the only way it knew how. With horror, the envoy was nameless to the media. Young, tall, dressed in standard diplomatic gray. He smiled too easily, spoke too little, and when pressed why he volunteered, he only shrugged. Some silences are just waiting for the right question. Military command objected immediately. No armed escort, said the treaty protocols. No surveillance drones, no reactive shielding, no AI support. It was suicide, so they tried to load him with defensive implants. He refused. That's not a conversation. That's a threat in disguise. He declined encryption, backup beacons, panic protocols. He carried no weapon, no translator node, just a small black bag slung across one shoulder, and something unreadable in his eyes, like loss or faith, or maybe both. One reporter asked, "What do you think you'll find in there?" He paused, then, "A people who once listened so hard it broke them." When the Terran diplomatic vessel crossed into Kalari space, all signals cut out, not jammed, muted, like the very act of listening had been forbidden. Long-range scans picked up the last image. The envoy's shuttle, drifting silently toward an orbiting structure the size of a small moon, black, spined, faintly pulsing. No docking clearance was requested, none granted, but the Kalari let him land. Why? No one knows, but for the first time in 212 years, the Kalari didn't shoot first. They opened a corridor, and the human walked in. Command waited. The galaxy watched, and somewhere in a dark room someone whispered, "Why did he bring the bag?" No one could answer. Not yet. But soon the silence would. Tools ChatGPT can make mist. The envoy crossed the border of Kalari space like a whisper-slicing glass. His shuttle drifted through planetary defense nets that had incinerated battleships. He should have triggered 100 alarms. Instead, nothing. Just a slow glide, approved by silence. High command of the Dominion observed his arrival through mirrored optics. Dozens of sensory arrays scanned him at quantum resolution. No weapons, no shields, no reactive suits, not even an active heartbeat monitor. Just a man, a small satchel, and a steady pulse. They allowed him in, not from diplomacy, for sport. "Let him walk," said one of the strategists, reclining in a ring of bone-sculpted authority. "If he thinks to deliver threat or plea, he can do it on his knees." The obsidian hall awaited, a throne room, a courtroom, a tomb depending on intent. It was where prisoners were judged, war criminals, spies, or the very foolish. The envoy was escorted through black corridors carved not from stone, but from compressed grief. Kalari tradition sculpted sorrow into everything. He walked slowly, arms loose at his sides. No resistance, no fear, just breathe, measured and still. The guards flanked him in full warplate, their neural spears aimed, ready to paralyze a spine at thought speed. Yet none dared touch him. They scanned again. Confirmed. Nothing threatening. Still, they didn't understand. "He doesn't act like prey," one of them muttered. Another, more nervous, whispered, "Why is he so still?" His footfalls echoed, not loudly, but with weight, like the air adjusted to each step, like the floor wanted to remember where he walked. The obsidian hall opened, ribbed like a giant lung exhaling darkness. Inside, 13 Kalari adjudicators sat in a semicircle, their eyes glowing faint red from centuries of surgical augmentation. They waited, motionless. The room pulsed with anticipatory malice. The guard stopped at the base of the dais. He stood before the council, still silent, still. A guard stepped forward with ceremonial chains. Even they trembled slightly as they lifted the cuffs. The metal hummed with psychic suppression fields. He didn't resist. He raised his hands. Let the cuffs close. No twitch, no wince, just acceptance. Like this was part of the story already written. The central adjudicator leaned forward. A female, her voice like silk cut on broken glass. "You bring no weapons. You bring no translator. You walk into our fire willingly. Explain yourself." The envoy looked up, met her eyes. Not defiance, not challenge. Understanding. She recoiled, only slightly. But the room noticed. Then, silence. No answer came. Just presence. It rolled through the hall like invisible smoke. Not a sound, not a move. Just a pause heavy enough to shift time. In the upper balconies, a lower commander turned to his aide and whispered, "Why doesn't he blink?" The aide responded, barely audible, "Maybe, because we're the ones about to." The envoy finally sat, not slumped, not slouched, poised, not like a prisoner, like a listener. He placed his satchel gently on the stone floor beside him, did not open it, and still said nothing. Outside the chamber, every sensor trained on his brain chemistry registered one confusing, unchanging metric: stillness. No fear, no aggression, no deception, just one unwavering emotional signal: expectation. For the first time in generations, the Kalari Council found itself uncertain, and in the silence that followed, they did not speak. They waited. Tools. The room was built for breaking people. The Kalari called it Vessel 9, a place where memory came undone and pride turned into begging. It didn't rely on crude pain, no screaming blades, no fire, just extraction, clinical, exact, surgical. But the human didn't break. He listened. From the moment they locked him in, shackled to the floor with isolation plates humming at his feet, they expected him to react like all others did: fear, confusion, bargaining. Instead, he sat cross-legged when they let him, stood when they forced him, moved only when asked. He didn't blink too often, didn't tremble, didn't sweat. The first technician ran full neural telemetry. His report was dismissed. It read, no resistance, no struggle, high levels of focus. Subject is observing us. They laughed. The next day, they stopped laughing. On day 2, the deprivation began. No food, no water. Light set to flicker. Temperature dropped to a chill calibrated to disrupt REM cycles. Still, he remained composed, eyes half-lidded, body folded in stillness that felt predatory in its patience. They flooded the room with encoded drelic static, a sonic virus designed to shatter thought cohesion. He tilted his head slightly, as if listening to a song too far to catch. They showed him holograms of tortured diplomats, mocked Earth's fall, laughed about the council exile. Still nothing. No flicker of pain, no denial, no anger. He simply sat, not as if meditating, as if waiting. By day 4, interrogator teams were rotating out due to unquantifiable cognitive disruption. One Kalari officer reported dreaming of a cold beach and a starless sky. She hadn't seen either in her lifetime. Another broke protocol by sitting across from him and whispering, "Why won't you do anything?" The human looked at her, not with smugness, but something heavier: recognition. She stumbled back like she'd been touched by lightning. They escalated. Physical pain was outlawed under Kalari Dominion codes for diplomacy, but they pushed the edge. Muscle shockers, gravity distortion, rhythmic claustrophobia. He didn't scream. He didn't ask them to stop. Why are you here? No answer. What did Earth send you to say? No movement. Are you here to spy? To trick us? To stall? Only silence. They put him in complete sensory blackout. 6 hours. 12. 30. When the stasis lifted, he was in the same position, eyes closed, breathing, measured. The silence started to bend them. The head interrogator, Sevet Kal, was a veteran of 30 psychological campaigns. She once cracked an Alarin king in 4 minutes using only mirrored memory loops. She entered the room on day 5, expecting swift conclusion. She lasted 12 minutes. He is not resisting, she told the council. He is reflecting us. I look into his face and see what we've done. He says nothing because we've already said enough. They stripped her of rank, called her compromised. But more interrogators left. A few began waking in their quarters in tears, unable to remember why. One was found sobbing over a child's drawing. No one knew where the drawing had come from. On day 6, an officer, young, arrogant, burst into the cell, slamming the wall with a shock rod. What are you hiding? Speak! The human looked up and smiled, just slightly, just once. The officer screamed and ran. They chained him tighter, scanned his body for implants. Nothing. One technician theorized the silence was a weapon, a passive psychic field drawn from traumatic memory. They called it emotive resonance deflection. Another said, no, he's just showing us ourselves, and we can't stand it. On day 7, he was brought before the hall again, weakened but unbroken. He stood before the throne of the dominant voice of the Kalari, a final attempt. The voice asked, are you the message? The human tilted his head, said nothing. The voice tried again. Is your silence threat? He blinked. Once, then returned to stillness. The voice whispered, more to himself than anyone. Or are you the mirror we swore never to face? They returned him to his cell, alone. But the damage was done. A culture built on power through projection was unraveling. All because one man refused to perform. The silence wasn't absence. It was presence, louder than speech, deeper than weapons. It filled the halls, cracked the armor of certainty, split open centuries of pride, and he never spoke a single word. Tools Chat-G. The Kalari called it the Bone Arena, a coliseum built into the core of their judicial mountain, its walls lined with ivory harvested from extinct creatures they themselves had purged. The floor wasn't dirt or sand, it was layered history, compressed remains of every condemned soul who had failed to entertain the dominion. This wasn't a place for execution, it was a place for spectacle, humiliation, unmaking. The human was brought in under silence, not restraint. He walked slowly, his ankles brushing ancient dust. Above him, thousands of Kalari filled the viewing terraces. No cheering, no chants, just expectation sharpened into hunger. They didn't come to see him survive. They came to see the myth die. The dominant voice rose from his spire seat, adorned in robes woven from the hair of conquered empires. He lifted one hand and spoke with the clarity of law carved in blood. In our history, we do not punish with death. We punish with legacy. He gestured toward the gates across the arena. If your silence holds value, let it speak through endurance. The crowd stirred. The gates began to rise. The beast stepped out, 10 meters tall, 6 legs, chitin like volcanic armor, eyes glowing red from generations of genetic cruelty. It was called Vorak, a war-bred titan engineered for pain, rage, and obedience only to violence. It had devoured the champions of 3 systems. It had once torn a biotank open with its scream, and it saw the human. No weapons were given, no armor, no shield, just a man in cloth standing in the arena of extinction. A low rumble shook the walls. Vorak's breath steamed across the field. It stepped forward. Another. Another. The crowd leaned in. The human didn't move, didn't brace, didn't tremble. He simply watched, and in that stillness, something rippled. Vorak halted, mid-charge, 1 foot in the air. It lowered its massive limbs slowly, tilted its head, snarled, but not in threat, in confusion. The human took one step forward. Vorak growled. But then, it whimpered. The crowd murmured. A high warden stood from the platform. Is it malfunctioning? No, whispered another. It's thinking. The man took another step, then sat down, cross-legged, facing the beast. And the Vorak, engineered killer of 100 bloodlines, lowered its head, pressed it to the ground, and knelt. Gasps, cries. One Kalari collapsed. He didn't fight it, someone yelled. He reminded it. Chaos bloomed. Arguments erupted across the tiers. Was this sorcery? Was it psychic warfare? Was it something older? Kalari scientists scanned for neurological interference, found only baseline emotional radiance, but it was too coherent to be random. In the silence, the man reached slowly into his satchel. Guards tensed, weapons were drawn, but he only pulled out a small folded piece of fabric. He unfolded it gently. A Terran child's drawing, crude, simple. A beast, towering, terrifying. Beside it, a stick figure holding its hand. A sun in the corner, crayon lines across the page. He laid it on the ground between himself and the Vorak. And the Vorak whined, turned, and walked away. The bone arena fell into true silence, not the kind enforced by fear, the kind that follows a miracle. In the balcony of strategists, someone whispered, "What is he?" A Kalari priest hissed, "He's not fighting, he's remembering, and now, so are we." By nightfall, the Vorak had laid down at the gates and refused to return to its cell. The man was escorted back to his chamber, but no one touched him, not out of respect, out of awe and fear, because the Kalari built a society on the assumption that strength was expressed through force, but the human had shown them something else, that presence could be louder than power. And now their arena, built for shame, had become a sanctuary, for a beast that remembered what it was before war, and for a man who never needed to raise his voice. The silence was no longer his, it was theirs. They brought him in under heavier guard than before, not because he had resisted, he hadn't lifted a hand, not because he had attacked, he hadn't spoken a word, but because the Vorak had knelt to him, because the arena had turned still, because he had reminded something engineered to kill, how to remember, and that frightened them more than any war ever had. Now, in a cold chamber lined with psionic filters and bioshielded observers, they turned their attention to the satchel. The bag had been with him from the start. No one had dared open it, until now. They expected a device, something small and ancient, human tech, black market cognition weapons, perhaps an encoded plague. They wore gloves. Decontamination fields hummed. One Kalari technician cracked the clasp, unfolded the flap, and paused. Inside was a single folded sheet of paper, old, physical, no encryption, no circuitry, just ink and crayon. It was a child's drawing. The room went silent, no alarms, no scans triggered. The paper was lifted carefully as if it might shatter, placed beneath biosensors. No threat detected, no hidden ink, no toxins, no reactive residue. Just a picture, drawn by a human child. Shaky lines, a yellow sun in the corner, a green and blue swirl labeled Earth, a stick figure in a suit, another smaller figure reaching toward it, and scribbled in large, uneven letters, "Come home soon, Dad." The Dominion High Warden entered, tall, elegant, her face etched with ritual scarring. She asked no questions, dismissed the guards. She stood alone in front of the projection and stared. Minutes passed, then an hour. She did not speak. The Kalari believed in strength through memory, but only the memories they chose to keep. They had written over their griefs with victory, their wounds with domination. But this was undeniable, uncurated, human. The High Warden reached out, not to touch it, only to hover her fingers near it, as if the air around the page still remembered the warmth of the child who drew it. "Why would he carry this?" she whispered. No one answered, because the answer had already been spoken, by silence. Not a bomb, not a virus, not a trick, just a piece of paper. and it struck harder than any weapon in their archives. Later, a junior archivist reviewing the session logged a personal note. It wasn't the drawing that undid us. It was the fact that he carried it as if it were more powerful than anything we could imagine. The paper was returned to the satchel. No one tried to scan it again. And from that moment, every Kalari who had seen it, every technician, officer, priest, or strategist, they stopped asking, "What is he here to do?" and began to whisper, "What are we about to become?" That night, as silence fell over the Dominion archives, the guards passed by his cell. He sat exactly as he had before, still, present, waiting. And though he still had not spoken, somehow they felt that he had already told them everything. No order was given, no writ signed, no command issued from the voice or the High Warden. The guards, hardened Kalari who had once torn traitors apart with bare hands, simply stood aside and let him go. Not because they were told, because they knew, because something inside them could no longer reconcile chains with silence. He rose without a word, picked up the satchel, placed the child's drawing back inside, and stepped forward. The doors to the obsidian hall opened before him, not mechanically, willingly. He walked the entire length of the central corridor, the corridor where sentences were passed, where executions were declared, and no one moved to stop him. Clerks paused mid-gesture. Judges stared, their mouths half open. Strategists leaned forward, not breathing. His footsteps echoed across the black stone like thunder dressed in velvet. One Kalari priest lowered his head and whispered a question to no one. "What are we witnessing?" Another answered quietly, "A species remembering its shadow." By the outer steps, a young Kalari child broke from the crowd, walked up to him, small, curious, unaware of what he represented to the adults around her. She reached out, touched his hand. He looked down, not startled, not stern, software present, entire. And the child smiled. Then for the first time since he arrived, the man spoke. His voice was not loud, not theatrical. It was soft, like memory returning after years of silence. "You were never monsters, just unheard." Those words struck deeper than any blade ever could. The warriors nearby, trained in dominance, soaked in conquest, felt something unravel. Not pride, not shame, recognition. One by one, Kalari began to kneel, not in submission, but in confusion, in reverence, in reflection. By the time he reached the steps of the hall's gate, hundreds stood in silence, watching, no weapons drawn, no protocols activated, just silence. And him. He descended the steps alone. No escort, no guards, no ship waiting, just the desert wind whispering through the ancient stones. His boots left light imprints in the dust, as if the land itself wasn't quite ready to let go. A report would later describe it like this: "He walked like someone who had forgiven us before we ever asked. His scanners showed no signal beacon, no retrieval craft, no orbital activity. He just kept walking. Toward the horizon, toward the beyond, toward whatever waited after the end of hatred. Some say he vanished that day. Others say he returned to the stars, to a people who watch but do not speak. A few believe he was never human at all, just a vessel for something Earth had become. But all agree on one thing. The silence left with him, but it did not fade. It changed them. And in the high hall of judgment, a new phrase was engraved on the black wall where death sentences used to be carved. You were never monsters, just unheard." And from that day forward, the Kalari began to listen. The Dominion had always been proud of its constancy. Laws carved in obsidian, protocols measured in centuries, mercy regarded as corrosion. But after the human walked through their heart, unchained, unguarded, unchanged, something inside the Kalari began to shift, not from command, from memory, from the echo he left behind. It began subtly. A judgment scheduled for public humiliation was postponed. Then another. One high adjudicator stood in the hall of condemnation and stared at the empty arena for 3 hours. When asked why, he simply said, "I forgot what silence sounded like. I wanted to remember." Within weeks, an unthinkable order was issued. All tribunal decisions were to include a period of stillness, 1 full hour of silence before any sentence. No arguments, no advocates, just listening. To the evidence, to the moment, to themselves. They renamed the Bone Arena, carved away the ivory skulls, rebuilt it with obsidian walls polished smooth enough to reflect every spectator's face. It became the Hall of Listening. At its entrance, inscribed in ancient Terran script, were 7 words: no judgment without stillness, no silence wasted. At first, traditionalists resisted. They claimed it was weakness, but their voices rang too loudly in the new quiet and were soon left behind. The people no longer cheered cruelty. They no longer needed blood to feel power. In the lower city districts, poets emerged. Not rebels, not agitators, just voices with rhythm. Verses once outlawed as sentiment now spread like fire through the underground. And the Kalari, species of war, of efficiency, began to feel again. One poem was passed hand to hand, etched into the side of a dismantled war drone. He burned nothing, he bled no one, but we are remade, and we call him the Quiet Flame. No one knew where he went. No ship had come for him. No satellite tracked his departure. But across the galaxy, his silence grew louder than any declaration. In the Korath Assembly, once Earth's bitterest rivals, a senator paused mid-speech, looked out over the chamber, and said, "We mocked Earth's silence because we feared what would break if we ever truly listened." In the refugee ports of the fringe stars, children told stories about the human who tamed a beast without a blade. They left pebbles in the shapes of ears along the walkways, offerings to a myth that never asked to be worshipped. In the Dominion capital, the High Warden visited the Hall of Listening alone. She sat at its center. No entourage, no armor. She placed a piece of old paper, carefully laminated on the floor. A child's drawing, Earth, a figure, a sun, a message. "Come home soon, Dad." She bowed her head and did not speak for the rest of the day. The human was never seen again. No name etched into record. No statue raised. He never sent another message. Never called back. Never asked for thanks. But his silence became legacy. It moved through systems, into language, into law, into listening. Not because he conquered, but because he reminded them what they had refused to hear. And long after his footprints vanished from the dust outside the obsidian hall, his echo remained. The legend spread like quiet fire, not through headlines, not through declarations, but in stories passed between hands, in whispers carried aboard trade ships and written into the folds of starlight. They called him many things: the quiet flame, the listener, the one who did not break. But to most he was simply the human. Across the galaxy, something impossible began to unfold. War-torn worlds reached out to one another, not with demands or ultimatums, but with shared memory. A species from the Glasson reaches sent a gift to the Kalari, a book of poems written in vacuum-resistant ink. A reptilian empire once known for slavery abolished its blood games and opened a university of listening. And Earth? Earth remained silent, still sealed, still watching. But now, others came to them, not to invade, not to threaten, to witness. A delegation from the old Deval Combine arrived without fanfare. They came not for trade, but to place a single artifact on Earth's orbiting archive satellite, a small carved replica of a human kneeling beside a beast. No words, just form, just presence. Peace treaties began to circulate, mediated not by force or neutrality, but by story. Each began with a moment of silence, a stillness in memory of a man who had never fired a shot, yet stopped a war. On the star charts used by deep-range explorers, a new annotation appeared. System Designate, WHW, where he walked. Pilgrims visited it not for resources or conquest, but for perspective. They landed, they sat, they didn't build shrines, they just listened. And on Earth, he returned, not with armor, not with glory, just the same satchel, worn from time and reverence. The reunion was quiet. A door opened. A girl ran forward. She was older now, still wore her hair in uneven braids, still held the same spark in her eyes. She threw her arms around him, held him tight. "Did they listen?" she whispered. He nodded once. "They were louder than they knew. I just helped them hear it." She opened the satchel and pulled out her drawing. Still folded, still sacred, still powerful. That night, as stars filled the sky like soft punctuation marks on a story too old for language, they sat beneath a tree planted after the fall. Not as warriors, not as heroes, just as family. Above them, satellites gently hummed with old Terran lullabies. Calm, familiar, hopeful. The same signal echoed from far systems, translated, adapted, honored, because the galaxy was no longer afraid of silence. It had learned to respect it, to seek it, to listen. And in the decades that followed, no great monument was ever raised in his name. None was needed, because every time a world chose understanding over aggression, every time a child was taught to pause before they judged, every time a diplomat stopped to listen before they spoke, he was remembered. A legend born not from war, but from presence, from stillness, from the quiet flame that burned across the stars and made the whole galaxy hear itself again.